Previously on MySql connector/net, we had a program, a DVD base, that had a form called FRM main that spawned another form called FRM query results via the show dialog. And when this was spawned, it automatically calls the form load event, and the form load event calls a function within the FRM main that gets SQL and returns it to the query results form before it actually displays the window, so that when the window comes up, it's already populated via the SQL that gets passed back from the main form. And in the previous video, what's returned was just a pre-canned SQL that wasn't variable at all. But now we're going to look at these controls: the unseen checkbox, the title text box, the location combo box, and the genre combo box. And based on the values in these controls, when we hit the query button, we're going to generate variable SQL that'll display different query results. So in other words, it's now going to do what it was originally intended to do, which is usefully look at data, do data mining. So if we compile and run this, and say I put a J in the title field, and hit the query button, you notice it generates an SQL. And it has the select of the various fields from the three tables that are joined together via two joins. The main DVDs table joined to the location table and the genre table. But now there's a where clause, and in this case the where clause just says d.title like, and has a single quote J %, single quote. And this basically is a wildcard. It's like asterisk in a lot of things like Internet Explorer or Windows Explorer. And essentially it's saying find all the titles that start with J and any number of characters after the J. That's what the % wildcard says. And then of course we have the ordered by d.title that's part of the static SQL. Everything but the where clause is part of the static SQL. So if we click OK, the results we get back are J. Edgar, Jane Eyre, John Carter, Johnny English Reborn, Jonah Hex, Jumper, and Justice League Unlimited. And we can keep going with this. Whoops. We can take the location and say only look at sci-fi 1. So this is saying has a title of J and a sci-fi 1 location. And if we hit query, that now generates a select statement that has where d.title like J % and l.name equal to sci-fi 01. And we click OK, and we'll now only get two results: John Carter and Justice League Limited saving the world. And if we go further and change the query to just fantasy, records that have a genre of fantasy, and hit the query button, we now have where title is like J, name for location is like sci-fi 01, and name for genre is like fantasy. And if we click on OK now, we only get one record, John Carter. And finally, if we click on the unseen checkbox and hit the query, we now get title like J, location sci-fi 01, genre fantasy, and not d.scene. So it's now all the unseen records that fit these characteristics. And if we click OK, there are no such records because I've seen John Carter. So how are we performing this miracle? Well, obviously we're going to have to look at the query event handler. So if we double click on that, we see we select the form and then bring up the query result form. And when we bring up the query result form, the first thing that gets called is the form edit, or the form load. And essentially what that's doing is calling a routine in the main form, since we established the link to the main form in the constructor. And it's calling get QE SQL and getting this variable SQL and then going through with the MySql data reader and looking at all the records that are gotten with this SQL. So if we go back to the main form and look at the get QE SQL query, you notice there's several new local variables that are added. We have this string for SQL, which we had before, and then we have a string str where clause, which is the where clause that gets built based on the condition of the controls. And then we have a n where clause count, which is a number of clauses we have, that the clauses are basically separated by an and. And then we have 3 local variables, location, genre, and title, that are the 3 controls, all the controls except the checkbox, that have possible string values. And we initially set the where clause equal to space where space, and the where clause count equal to 0. And we check the title text box, and if that's not empty, we set the str title equal to the contents of it, and we say is the n where clause greater than 0. And basically what that means is if it's greater than 0, there's already a clause, so we're going to have to concatenate in a space and space between the previous clause and this clause we're building. And then we concatenate in the where clause d.title like single quote, and then we have whatever was typed into the text field, and then a percent wildcard and an end single quote and an end parentheses. You can probably get away with not having parentheses in the subclauses, but I think it looks a lot better to have them, and it's a lot less possibility of being ambiguous. And then essentially we do exactly the same thing with the combo box. We check if the selected item is not null, which means we've selected something in the combo box. And then we get the combo box selected item and convert it to string and put that in the str location. And once again check if the where count is greater than 0 and put in an and if it is. And then we use the clause l.name equal and whatever we selected in the location box between single quotes because it's a string, and then an end parentheses. And the genre control is identical. It has selected item not equal to null, and we get the selected item to string, and then concatenate in the and if we've already gotten where clauses, and say g.name equal to single quote whatever was in the combo box single quote in parentheses. And for the checkbox it's a little different. We say if the checkbox is checked, then check to see if there's where clause previously and concatenate in an and then put in not d.seen, because if the unseen box is checked, it means we're looking for things that haven't been seen. So we need to say not d.seen. Not is the SQL equivalent of exclamation mark in C#. And as always with these control to SQL translation sections, we always increment the in where clause count at the bottom of the section to let the other sections know we have previous where clauses, and also to let know this statement where we say if where clause is greater than 0, then concatenate in the where clause. If this is equal to 0, it means we didn't set any of the controls and we just used the static SQL without any where clause qualifying it. And then we always have the order by d.title. That's actually part of the static SQL. It's just the part at the bottom. So what happens if we run this with none of the controls selected? Then we're just going to get that static part without a where clause qualifying it. So if we hit query, you see we get the select statement with all the fields from DVDs joined to location and joined to genre, and then no where clause whatsoever, and then the ordered by title clause. So if we click OK on that, we get everything. We get all the records that are in the database. The last ones being the Z's, Zoom and Zombieland and so on. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a lot, and I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe.